Okay, the third thing that we want to discuss in our notes today is quadratic inequalities and how to solve them and write the answer in interval notation. So here are the steps. The first one is to factor everything completely, and then we're going to find the zeros of each factor and place those zeros on a number line so that we can test each subinterval and be able to write our answer in interval notation. So here we go. In example 1, the first thing we need to do is make this be in relation to 0. And so what I mean by that is that this -6 here is going to need to move to the other side of the equation, which is going to give me 2x squared plus 7x plus 6 is less than 0. And then I am going to factor this, which, as you remember from the previous slide, means I'm going to multiply the ends here, which is going to give me a multiply number of 12, and my add number comes from the middle term, which is 7, and so we need two numbers that will multiply to 12 and add to 7, and so if you think about your factors of 12, the two that will add to 7 would be 4 and 3, both of them being positive. And so now we're going to write down the ends of this quadratic, and in the middle we're going to have plus 4x and plus 3x, and we're going to make sure that we're complete here by putting less than 0. So now, grouping together the first two terms, let's see what we can factor out from those. It appears that both of those have a 2 in common, and they also have an x in common. And so what's going to be left from those two terms when we factor out a 2x? From the first term, x is left, and from the second term, we have a 2. And you can always double check yourself just by re-multiplying here to make sure that you end up with what you started with. Okay, with the next two terms, what can we factor out? Well, they both have a 3 in common, and more specifically a positive 3, and that's again going to leave us with x plus 2, which is going to be less than 0. And so now factoring this, we're going to have x plus 2 and 2x plus 3, which is less than 0. Now, we're not going to set both of these less than 0 like we did when we were solving. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to draw a number line, and we're going to put the zeros of these two factors on the number line. So if you look at the first factor, x plus 2, if you were going to set that equal to 0, you would get -2. And if you look at the second factor, 2x plus 3, if you were to set that equal to 0, you'd move over the 3 so that it became negative, and then divide by 2, which is going to give you -3/2 or -1.5. Now, one thing you need to be very careful of is to put the numbers on the number line in order. So since -2 is smaller than -3/2, that's why I put that number on the left side of the number line, and -3/2 went on the right side. So that's sort of a big deal there. You want to make sure that you write your numbers in order. Now, looking back at the inequality, because we are looking for numbers that are less than 0, not less than or equal to 0, these numbers are going to be open on our number line, meaning they are not going to be included in our answer. And so that's why I draw the open circles over my zeros there, -2 and -3/2. Those numbers are going to make this quadratic equal to 0. They are not going to make it less than 0. And so that's why they are not included in the answer. Now, what I'm going to do next is start choosing numbers from each interval to plug back into this version of the inequality right here. This is the version that I want to be looking at because it's the easiest one whenever we go to do this. And so if you plug in a number from this section, let's just say, for example, -3, that number would be smaller than -2. Then when I plug -3 into this first parentheses, -3 plus 2 is going to be a negative number. So I'm going to put a minus sign to indicate a negative. When I plug -3 in for x into this factor, 2 times -3 is -6, plus 3 is also negative, more specifically, -3. So when I have a negative times a negative, that means I am going to have a positive for this section. So I'm going to put a P there to represent positive. Now, for negative 2 and negative 3 halves, negative 3 halves is negative 1.5. So in between negative 2 and negative 1.5, you could plug in, like, let's say negative 1.75. And you could do that in your calculator if you wanted to. And if you did that, into the first factor, you would get a positive number. And in the second factor, you would get a negative number. And when you multiply a positive times a negative, that's going to give you a negative. Now, for the last section from negative 3 halves until infinity, there are a lot of numbers that you could plug in. 0 is a really easy choice, and so I'm going to plug in 0 for x into both of these, and 0 plus 2 is going to give me positive, and 2 times 0 plus 3, plugging in here, is going to give me a positive as well, and so that's going to give me positive. Now, once I have this sign chart, I just need to write the answer in interval notation. So going back one more time to look at the inequality here, we are looking for the sections that are less than 0, and that would be the negative sections. And so what we're looking for are all of the negative sections, and so that would be this section right here, this particular interval, which is going to be from, I'm ready to write my answer now, open parentheses. Since we do not have equality here, notice that we put open circles, and that was because of this sign right here. We did not have the equal bar under that sign, and then starting at negative 2 and going until negative 3 halves, and that's also going to be open with a parentheses since we do not have equality. That 0 is not included. Okay, hopefully that made sense for the most part. If not, please feel free to visit me during my office hours, and I can discuss anything that maybe you didn't quite catch on to in that example. I'm going to work one more example so that maybe we can get a little bit better hang of it. For example 2, this is already in relation to 0 on the right-hand side here, and so all that we really need to do is factor the left-hand side. And so what I notice is that I can factor out a 5x from both of those terms, and that's going to leave me with x squared minus 4 is greater than or equal to 0. What I then notice is that on the interior of this parentheses, that can be factored further as a difference of squares. And so I'm going to factor that parentheses into a difference of squares, which is going to be x plus 2 and x minus 2. Okay, so now I have 3 factors, and so what are my zeros? I've got x is equal to 0 here. I've got x is equal to negative 2 here, and x is equal to positive 2 here. And so 3 zeros, make sure that you write them on your number line in order. So that would be negative 2, 0, and positive 2. Now, earlier on example 1, we had open circles over our zeros because of this inequality symbol that did not have the equal bar. Now we have an equal bar under our greater than sign, and so therefore we are going to have closed circles over the top of each of these zeros. And so now we're going to start by finding what the result should be on each different section. And so we're going to plug in numbers from each interval to test whether this is going to be positive or negative. So if we look at the first section here from negative infinity to negative 2, we could plug in, let's just say, negative 3 for x. And so if we do that to each of the 3 factors, 5 times negative 3 is negative. Negative 3 plus 2 is also negative, and negative 3 minus 2 is also negative. And whenever I have 3 negatives multiplied together, the result is going to be a negative. Okay, between negative 2 and 0, we could plug in negative 1 for x. And so 5 times negative 1 is going to be negative. Negative 1 plus 2 is going to be a positive. And finally, negative 1 minus 2 is going to be a negative. And when I have 2 negatives multiplied together, that's going to give me a positive. Between 0 and 2, we could try positive 1, and so 5 times positive 1 is going to give me positive. 1 plus 2 is going to give me positive, and 1 minus 2 is going to give me negative, and 1 negative is going to give me a negative overall. And then finally, from 2 to infinity, we could choose 3 to plug in for x, and you'll notice that 5 times 3, 3 plus 2, and 3 minus 2 are all positive, and so this last section is going to be positive. Now, the last thing we want to do is write our answer in interval notation, and so notice we are looking for the sections that are greater than or equal to 0, which is going to mean the positive sections are what we're looking for, and so those positive sections are going to be here from negative 2 to 0, and here from 2 to infinity. And so writing that in interval notation is going to look like this: bracket negative 2 until 0 with a bracket. And the reason I'm using brackets once again is because of these closed circles, and I know it was closed because of the inequality symbol right here with the equal bar. And then I'm going to use the union symbol to represent that there's another interval that I need to include here, and that's going to be the interval from closed 2 until infinity, and we always use open parentheses on either negative infinity or positive infinity.